Murdorf and the Mortal Flaw, Book 1, Chapter 25, Wet Wood. It was pitch dark, and crickets were chirping as the riders in the east sat around the campfire speechless, tearing the flame-cooked antelope with their teeth. In the near distance they heard hoofs pounding the ground. Tossing the antelope to the side, the men jumped to their feet and pulled their swords. The shifting glimmer of the flames confirmed their hope. Windsor's face was disclosed through the light of his orb. "Cronies, we sure are glad to see you." Navi stood with a wobble. The riders dismounted with a moan here and a groan there. Boldar and Mongard went to look at Skeener's injuries. Navi hobbled behind them. Cosby put his sword down and watched the fire, staring at it hissing at the wood. He had been in deep thought and returned into himself. "What about me?" Navi said. "Aren't you even a little bit curious as to why I'm limping?" He addressed this to Windsor and Navi. Even with his loud mouth, they simply ignored him. Windsor noticed the unfamiliar faces among them and whispered to Gamonza, inquiring about them. Gamonza explained how they came to ride with them, but Windsor didn't seem pleased with virtual strangers riding on such an important mission. Gamonza then turned the tables and asked about the unfamiliar Earth-dweller Fleece. Windsor was dumbfounded to give an answer. "You're right, I'm just as guilty." "That is it, though. No one else can ride." Noticing Navi hobbling, Navi finally asked, "So what happened to your leg?" "I thought you would never notice," Navi said with a sigh. "A derv bit me, crony." "Oh, you're such a wimp," Boldar teased him. "A derv bit me too, but I'm not crying over it." Always the optimist, Osney patted him on the shoulder. "Oh, you'll be fine, mate." "Well, that's not the same one that bit you way back at the river, is it?" They knew about it only because Windsor had seen it all happen through his orb. Orbs can be tricky, taking power away from the prophet when it's used for communication. "That bite should be healed by now." "Inside of my thigh, crony. Every time I ride, it gets rubbed raw." "You need some crushed mammorgen root and Frigi tree root put on that, Navi," Nodora advised. "What I want to know is what in the world happened to your hat?" Windsor asked Navi, persisting on trying to wear the burned-out thing occasionally. Let's just say Inca has a new friend." He pointed to Zeppelin, Amase's dragon. "Speaking of friends," Osney quickly injected, "this is Sagron and Amase. They have proven to be great assets." "Pleased to meet you," Windsor lied. "The pleasure is ours. We have heard much about you." "Well, don't believe everything you hear," warned Windsor. "People like to make up out of nothing, you know." His words slowed when Amase turned around. His dark eyes shone with a hint of mystery and a great deal of nobility. His sheepish face was unusual, but not unmistakable for a man of many years such as Windsor. He shifted his gaze towards the boy's bare, hoof-like feet, just to be sure. "You're an Ani," he said, putting his finger on his ethnicity. "I thought the Ani people were annihilated, wiped plumb from the face of the earth. In fact, I'm sure of it." Something told him there was a purpose in this lad. The Ani looked at Windsor. "Well, how do you know that I'm an Ani?" "Well, 'cause he's older than dirt," Navi said, teasing the ancient prophet. "Where did you come from?" "My father found me in the woods when I was a baby," answered Amase, keeping it simple. "Your people have been wiped out for generations, but how are you here?" asked Windsor, puzzled over the lad. "Gad, what is that smell?" Windsor asked, the stink finally breaking through his concentration. It wasn't as though they were just noticing it. They smelt the stench when they had all gathered around, but everyone was too busy greeting each other to say anything. The riders from the east burst into unified laughter as they pointed at Osney. Standing behind Osney, Gilgore took a whiff of the fetid smell. "Phew, you smell almost worse than Zorgar's feet." "Navi about got me killed with that bloody dragon," complained Osney. He had given his clothes a good scrub back in the village, but the smell was not entirely gone. To make things worse, the inside of his boots got soaked in the dead fish. That was where much of the odor was coming from. With each passing day, the smell changed, finally settling on a sour, fishy smell. The riders who didn't know one another got introduced, and others got reacquainted. "I see food," Zilvor finally said. "Me too," Skeener said, licking his chops. Navi pulled Windsor off to the side and whispered, "The boy, he knows of the ancient prophecies. He knows of Shilly Shally Fold." Well, how can that be? Windsor asked, puzzled. Well, I don't know, but there's something about that lad. With enthusiasm, the food and fellowship, the riders gathered around the fire. Cosby was glad to have his closest friends, Nimri and Novatian, around him again. They joined him on the log next to the fire. Mongard resumed his place beside the fire, picking up the piece of wood he had been whittling, the same he had been working on for the last few nights. It was beginning to take definite shape. Some of the riders were curious about his head occasionally jerking, and some whispered inquiries. Sitting around the blazing fire, the riders swapped stories. They rolled with laughter about the prank Navi pulled on Skinner, and Skinner threatened to pay him back. They compared notes of their encounter with the riders of Quadar and the Dervs. Soon, however, their subject shifted to the Tomb of Murdorf. Ah, the Tomb of Murdorf, Vandorf said, as he pulled off his boots and started polishing them as they sat in front of the sculpted tomb. Poor fellow, murdered by his own brother. The paramount of all stories of betrayal, unfortunately, one that continues to repeat itself, said Windsor. Guimondze agreed. After he killed his brother, he felt no remorse. In fact, it has been said that he laughed at him, even taunted him as he pierced him with his sword. They continued to discuss the tomb for a little longer, until silence fell upon the campsite. With full bellies, everyone realized they were dead tired from their respective journeys. But vibrations of inspiration were stirring in Navi's belly. The prophet had to reveal what he knew. Playing in the fire with his sword, Navi knocked a glowing ember out of the pile. He then poured a large amount of water on the single log. The fire continues to burn, he noted, even though one log is removed and its light extinguished, as long as the others remain lit and remain in a pile together. He had the floor now, each ear turned towards the prophet. He poured more water on the fire, extinguishing its light altogether. It was now pitch dark, a darkness that could be felt. Navi stretched out his staff and relit the fire, miraculously drying out the moisture that had been poured over the wood. Gilgol, with his long legs nearly reaching the flames, kicked the other log back into the fire. Navi kicked it out again. Leave it there. It does not belong. He raised his voice now to address the whole group. There is one among us who does not belong. He paused for a moment and then continued. Here, let me show you. He kicked the log that had been saturated with water to the fire, and the fire immediately began to dim, its energy dying. He knocked it back out, and the fire quickly regained its flame. There is one among us who does not belong. He is wet wood. We must leave him. He has already made up his mind. He seeks the sword for his own power. He will take what doesn't belong to him. There is darkness and there is light, but there is nothing in between. You betray us all as well as yourself. You are not fit to serve the immortal king. You know who you are. I appeal to you, conform your ways. Change your allegiance. There was dead silence. The only noise now was the chirping of crickets. No one moved a muscle. Each rider sat wondering who the wet wood was. Everyone, that is, except the one who had made up his mind. He knew what he wanted. His heart lusted for that sword, to feel its power, to be looked up to. He craved it, yearned for it, dreamed of it. The power, the position, the wealth. All that it offered, he wanted. Windsor put his hands over his face. He regretted that they had allowed the extras to ride with them, and was confounded about the Ani. The prophecy had even put a sobering damper on Osney, who always had an optimistic word. But now he sat with nothing to say. There was dead silence as the younger prophet got up to turn in for the night. His words set a suspicious mood, especially concerning the extra additions to the group. Vandorf wondered if he should have allowed Fleece to come, while many of the riders on the east were having qualms regarding their decision to let Sagron and Amase ride. After all, they hardly knew either of them. The riders were now skeptical about each other. No one knew who they could trust. From what they knew about the innate corrupt soul of man, everyone was a potential threat. The hope for primordial harmony was lost the moment lust for position was cultivated in Darvant's heart and acted upon. The evil propagated to all humanity corrupted them to the core of their being, now marking all humanity with a condition, a bend in their soul for evil. Windsor had seen friends succumb to the temptation of the sword, mighty kings fall, good kings, even prophets, who already possessed power, gain a lust for more. No one could be trusted. Windsor couldn't even trust himself. Tired, the riders slid into their bedrolls, the words of the prophecy accusing them, doubting others, suspecting one and then another. Mongard set his piece of crafted wood beside him as he lay down. The fire cast its light upon the little statue of Murdorf he had whittled out of a piece of wood, an exact replica of the crafted stone.